was 2:30 a.m. on a rainy Tuesday in Oakland, California, when Clint Eastwood got the phone call that would change how Hollywood viewed him forever. Not as the man with no name, not as Dirty Harry, but as something far more dangerous. A man who refused to let fear win. The voice on the other end belonged to Jerry Fielding, his longtime friend and frequent collaborator. Jerry's voice was shaking. "Clint, they have Sarah. They want $2 million, and they said if we call the police, they'll kill her." Sarah Fielding was Jerry's 16-year-old daughter, a sweet kid who'd grown up around movie sets and considered Clint a second father. She'd been kidnapped, leaving her part-time job at a bookstore in Berkeley. The kidnappers had called Jerry's house exactly at midnight, giving him instructions that were simple and terrifying. Get the money. Wait for further contact. Tell no one, especially not the cops. But Jerry had called Clint. Clint sat up in his bed, instantly alert. At 54 years old, he'd learned to trust his instincts, and every instinct was screaming that this wasn't just about money. "Have you heard from them since midnight?" he asked. "Nothing. They said they'd call back at 6 a.m. with instructions." Jerry's voice cracked. "Clint, I don't have $2 million. I've got maybe $300,000 in liquid assets. My house, sure, but not cash. Not by 6 a.m. Clint was already getting dressed. "I'm coming over. Don't do anything until I get there." What Jerry didn't know was that Clint had been expecting something like this for months. Success in Hollywood brought attention, and not all of that attention was welcome. Clint had been quietly consulting with security experts, learning about kidnapping patterns, understanding how these operations worked. He'd never told Jerry about these conversations, but he'd noticed things. Cars that followed too closely, the same faces showing up at different events, patterns that most people would miss. Clint drove through the empty streets of Oakland, his mind working through possibilities. This wasn't random. Someone had been watching, planning, studying Jerry's family routines. They knew about Sarah's job, knew she'd be alone, knew Jerry had money, but not immediate access to millions. This was professional. When Clint arrived at Jerry's house in the hills, he found his friend pacing the living room like a caged animal. Jerry was 49, a successful composer who'd scored dozens of films, but right now he looked like a broken man. His wife Margaret sat on the couch, tears streaming down her face, clutching a photo of Sarah. "Tell me everything," Clint said, his voice that same quiet rasp that had made him famous, but now carrying a different kind of authority. "Every detail, from the moment she left for work." Jerry went through the day minute by minute. Sarah had left at 3 p.m. for a shift at Cody's Books on Telegraph Avenue. She was supposed to close at 10 p.m. and be home by 10:30. When she didn't arrive by 11, Margaret had started calling. The bookstore manager said Sarah had left exactly at 10, walking to her car like always. Her car was found 2 blocks away, door open, keys in the ignition. "The phone call came at exactly midnight," Jerry continued. Man's voice calm, professional. He knew her schedule, knew my name, knew about the films I'd worked on. He said they had Sarah, that she was safe for now, and that I had 6 hours to think about how much she was worth to me. Clint listened, noting details. Professional voice, precise timing, knowledge of Jerry's work. This wasn't opportunistic. Did he have an accent? Any background noise? No accent. Educated. And it was quiet, like he was calling from somewhere isolated. Jerry paused. "Clint, what if they hurt her? What if?" "They won't," Clint interrupted, but his mind was racing. 6 hours from midnight to 6 a.m. That was deliberate. Enough time to panic. Not enough time to think clearly. These people understood psychology. At 3:15 a.m., Clint made a decision that would define the next 48 hours. "We're not waiting for their call." "What do you mean?" Margaret asked, speaking for the first time since Clint arrived. "I mean we're going to find her before 6 a.m. Jerry stared at his friend. "Clint, these aren't movie bad guys. This is real. If we do the wrong thing. If we do nothing, she's probably dead anyway," Clint said flatly. "Professional kidnappings like this, the victim usually doesn't survive regardless of whether the ransom gets paid. They know too much. They've seen too much." The room went silent. Margaret's crying stopped. Jerry's pacing stopped. The brutal honesty hung in the air like a death sentence. "So what do we do?" Jerry whispered. Clint was already thinking like a director, breaking down the scene, analyzing the shots, understanding the angles. "We think like them. They took her at 10 p.m., called at midnight. That's a 2-hour window. In 2 hours, how far can you drive from Telegraph Avenue while staying under the radar?" He walked to Jerry's bookshelf and pulled down a Bay Area map, spreading it on the coffee table. "They didn't take her to San Francisco. Too many cameras, too much traffic. They didn't go south toward San Jose. Same problem. East puts them in suburban neighborhoods where neighbors know to strangers. That leaves north or west." "West hits the Bay," Margaret said, understanding immediately. "Exactly. So north. But not too far north, because they need to be able to travel back and forth for communication." Clint drew a circle on the map. "Somewhere in this area. Rural enough to be isolated, close enough to be convenient." At 3:45 a.m., Clint did something that surprised both Jerry and Margaret. He called his stunt coordinator from his last film, a man named Ray Wise who'd spent 10 years in special forces before getting into movies. "Ray, it's Clint. I need a favor, and I need it now." He explained the situation quickly, efficiently. Ray didn't ask questions about involving police. He understood immediately that this was about saving a girl's life, not following protocol. "Meet me at Jerry's house in 20 minutes, Clint said. "And Ray, bring whatever you think we might need." While they waited for Ray, Clint continued studying the map, but he was also studying Jerry and Margaret. Jerry was falling apart, which was understandable, but not helpful. Margaret had stopped crying and was watching Clint intently, as if she was beginning to understand that her daughter's life might depend on this quiet man who usually just made movies. "Clint," she said suddenly, "why are you doing this? Why are you risking everything?" Clint looked up from the map. "Sarah calls me Uncle Clint. Has since she was 5 years old. You think I'm going to let some piece of garbage hurt my family?" Ray arrived at 4:10 a.m. driving a nondescript van. When he entered the house, Jerry barely recognized him. This wasn't the easygoing stuntman from the movie set. This was a soldier, alert and focused, carrying a large duffel bag. "What's the plan?" Ray asked Clint directly. "We find them before 6 a.m., and we get Sarah back." "With what resources?" Clint spread the map on the table again. Knowledge, logic, and refusal to accept failure. Ray studied the map, then looked at his watch. "It's 4:15. Sunrise is at 6:45. If they're holding her somewhere in this area." He pointed to Clint's circle. "They probably have a watch rotation. Minimal crew overnight, more security during the day." "How many people are we talking about?" Jerry asked. "Professional job like this? Minimum 3. Driver, inside man, coordinator. Probably no more than 5 total," Ray said. "And we're 2 people," Jerry pointed out. "3, Margaret said firmly. "I'm coming." "No," Clint said immediately. "If something goes wrong. If something goes wrong, I want to be there for my daughter." Margaret interrupted. "And if you two get yourselves killed being heroes, someone needs to be alive to call the police." Clint looked at her for a long moment, then nodded. "Ray, what did you bring?" Ray opened his duffel bag. Night vision goggles, tactical flashlights, communication equipment, and several items that Jerry decided he didn't want to identify. "Surveillance first," Ray said. "We identify the location, assess the situation, then make a plan." At 4:30 a.m., they left Jerry's house in Ray's van, heading north into Marin County. Clint had divided the search area into sectors, and he was betting everything on his ability to think like the kidnappers. "They need a building," he reasoned as Ray drove through the pre-dawn darkness. "Something isolated but not abandoned. Abandoned buildings attract attention from teenagers, homeless people, police patrols. They want a place that looks normal but offers privacy." "Ranch house," Ray suggested. "Rural property with good sight lines." "Or industrial," Margaret added. "Warehouse space, storage facility." They drove slowly through the area Clint had identified, using the night vision equipment to scan properties. Most were clearly occupied family homes. Several were genuinely abandoned and crossed off the list. At 5:20 a.m., they found it. A ranch-style house set back from the road, surrounded by oak trees, with 2 cars parked outside. One was a common sedan, the type that wouldn't attract attention. The other was a van, positioned for quick loading. Lights were on in what appeared to be a back room, but the rest of the house was dark. "That's it," Ray said quietly, studying the property through binoculars. "How do we know?" Jerry whispered. "Look at the positioning," Clint replied. "Cars ready for escape. Lights only where they need them. Rural location but maintained property. Everything fits." Ray was already assessing tactical options. 2 entry points visible, probably others. "We need to know how many people, where they are, where Sarah is." "And we have 30 minutes, Margaret said, checking her watch. Clint made a decision. "Ray, can you get close enough to see inside?" "Give me 10 minutes. While Ray moved toward the house, using skills Jerry had never imagined his stunt coordinator possessed, Clint and Margaret waited in the van. The silence stretched between them until Margaret spoke. "She's only 16, Clint." "I know. If we're wrong about this." "We're not wrong." Ray returned at 5:35 with information. 3 men visible, all armed. Sarah's in the back room, tied to a chair but appears unharmed. They're relaxed, not expecting trouble. Classic overconfidence. "What's your recommendation?" Clint asked. "We call police, surround the place, negotiate." "How long would that take?" "Hour minimum to get tactical units in position." "They're calling Jerry at 6 a.m. If he doesn't answer, or if they see police activity, Sarah's dead." Clint looked at his watch. "We have 25 minutes. So what do you want to do?" Clint was quiet for a long moment, thinking like a director again. Scene analysis. 3 armed men, 1 hostage. Limited time. Amateur rescue team. In a movie, the hero would storm in guns blazing. In real life, people died. "We don't fight them," Clint said finally. "We remove their advantages." "Explain." "Their advantage is control. They have Sarah. They have the timeline. They have the element of surprise. We take those away." At 5:40 a.m., Clint implemented a plan that was part psychology, part tactics, and part pure audacity. Ray used his military training to cut the phone line to the house, then positioned himself where he could see all exit points. Margaret, against every instinct Clint had, stayed with the van in position to call for backup if needed. And Clint walked up to the front door and knocked. The reaction inside was immediate and panicked. Voices, movement, the sound of chairs scraping. Someone shouted, "Check the back." Another voice. "Who the hell?" Clint knocked again, harder this time. The door opened 6 inches, revealing a man in his 30s, trying to look casual, but clearly rattled. "Yeah, what do you want?" "I'm looking for Jerry Fielding," Clint said calmly. The man's face changed. This wasn't in their script. "Don't know any Jerry Fielding." "Sure you do. You called him a few hours ago about his daughter. I'm here to discuss terms." Now the man was completely off balance. The plan was to wait until 6 a.m., to control the conversation, to dictate terms. This wasn't supposed to happen. "I don't know what you're talking about," the man said, but he was looking over Clint's shoulder, scanning for backup, for police, for some explanation of how their careful plan had gone wrong. "Here's what's going to happen," Clint said, his voice carrying that same authority that had commanded movie sets for decades. "You're going to let Sarah go. You're going to get in your cars, and you're going to drive away. Right now, before this gets complicated." "Or what?" But the man's voice lacked conviction. "Or I stop being polite." There was something in Clint's tone, in his posture, in the way he stood absolutely still while making this threat, that cut through all the man's training and planning. This wasn't fear. This wasn't negotiation. This was certainty. "You don't understand the situation." The man tried again. "We have. You have about 15 seconds to make a smart decision." Clint interrupted. "Because my partner is positioned outside your back door. Jerry's already called the FBI, and a tactical team is en route. Your window for walking away is closing." It was all lies, but Clint delivered them with the same conviction he'd brought to every role. The man looked behind him toward the back room, then back at Clint, calculating odds that no longer made sense. Think about it, Clint continued. You wanted $2 million. How much is it worth to you to spend the next 20 years in federal prison? At 5:55 a.m., Sarah Fielding walked out of that house, shaken but unharmed. The three kidnappers drove away in their two cars, probably realizing they'd been outmaneuvered, but not entirely sure how. Ray emerged from his position. Margaret burst into tears of relief, and Jerry got a phone call from Clint instead of from kidnappers. Bring the van to 2847 Redwood Road, Clint said simply. Sarah's safe. The full story never made the papers. The kidnappers were never caught, but they never tried anything like this again. Sarah went back to school. Jerry kept making movies, and life returned to normal. But crews on Clint Eastwood's sets began to notice something. He was still the same quiet, efficient director, still demanded professionalism and respect. But there was something else now, something that wasn't there before. A sense that this was a man who would go to any length to protect the people he cared about. Years later, when asked about that night, Clint's response was characteristic. Some things are more important than making movies. But Sarah, now a successful lawyer with kids of her own, tells a different story. She talks about waking up in that chair, terrified and convinced she was going to die. About hearing a familiar voice outside, calm and steady. About realizing that Uncle Clint had come to get her. He saved my life, she says. Not because he was a movie star, not because he was tough on screen. Because when it mattered most, he showed up. That might be the most important review Clint Eastwood ever received.